Dovrei salutare il professor Nigel Tapper che insegna scienza ambientale alla Monash University di Melbourne, alla Scuola della Terra, Atmosfera e Ambiente. Ce l'abbiamo, se lo vedo, passo all'inglese e... Professor Tapper, hello. Good evening,
Hello.
I should say, probably, right?
Buongiorno to you and good evening to me.
Excellent. So your main issue is environmental science, and we've been talking about this for the last half hour. It's a pivotal side of the science, art, and philosophy of printing in all forms. Please tell us where, how and when we should tackle the issue regarding printing and sustainability, human impact, etc.
Well, thank you very much. What I would like to do is talk to you for 10 minutes or so about sustainability matters relating to business. And I want to focus particularly on this time of COVID-19, this really pivotal time in our history. I think none of us have experienced in our own lifetimes what this is bringing to us in terms of business and sustainability and relationship with climate change and so on. So what I would like to do is begin with this slide. And on the left, we see a whole lot of measures of increasing human impact. So humans have been on this earth, Homo sapiens, our species, for about 350,000 years. But it's only in the last 100, 150 years that our impact has been as great as it is. And for example, on the left, we see things like urban population growth, paper consumption, the opening of McDonald's restaurants, the number of international tourists. So all of these things are measures that indicate human impact on our globe and on our resource consumption. On the right-hand side, we have something relating to what we call the human impact equation, the IPAT equation, which says that human impact is a function of the population of the Earth times the relative affluence of the Earth, of inhabitants, times the amount of technology that we have introduced to the system. And if we have a look at the cube, we can see that in 2011, the product of population, affluence, and technology has created a massive cube. Whereas down in the bottom corner, you can see what that impact was in relative size in 1900 and in 1950. So clearly, humans are having a massive impact on the globe, and it's at least partly because of the growth of population. So what I want to do is begin with a general definition of sustainability. And that really boils down, it really condenses to the meeting of the needs of the present generation, that is, those of us who are alive on Earth at the moment, without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And putting it in a business perspective, sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present with generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So sustainable development relates very closely to sustainable business. We have 5 core principles of sustainability. They are intergenerational equity, which means that those of us that are alive today should not overuse resources so that they are not available for future generations. We also have intragenerational equity, which means that we need to look after each other in the current generation, both within our country and across the globe. And this is about equitable consumption of resources. Thirdly, conservation of biological diversity. We know that humans depend on the environment, on other species, and on the habitats that support them. So we must do whatever we can to maintain biological diversity. The fourth point is precaution. We must not take unnecessary risks with the environment.
Which we have in the past with no worries whatsoever.
Absolutely. So if we don't take those precautions, then we are likely to lead ourselves into all sorts of issues. For example, climate change. Climate change is an example of an issue that has begun to get out of control because we haven't taken the necessary steps. And finally, the internalization of environmental costs, which means that in a business sense, you need to use a costing system to account for the environmental costs of what you do, whether it's discharging pollution or consuming resources or whatever. So we must pay properly for what we produce and not take shortcuts. And on the right-hand side, we have the three pillars of sustainability, which are social equity, environmental protection, and economic viability. So in 2015, the United Nations introduced the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN SDGs. And this was a blueprint for 2030. And these were goals that we were, as a globe, as a community of nations, were to work towards in 2030. And you can see that there are 17 sustainable development goals.
Yes.
And a lot of them, or many of them, relate to business. I mean, things like well-being and good health and education, gender equality in the workplace, affordable clean energy, economic growth and decent work, and sustainable cities and communities. All of these are development goals that business, as well as the wider community, must work towards. But unfortunately, we have had this massive disruptor of progress in all sorts of ways, a massive disruptor of the economy, a massive disruptor of progress toward the United Nations Development Goals. And in particular, I think the things that have been mostly impacted relate to these things I've got here. Increased poverty and associated hunger, because much of the global population, particularly in the less developed part of the world, a lot of jobs in the informal workforce have been lost. And even in developed countries, we see massive losses of jobs and hardship for many people. Massive impacts on health and well-being with unknown long-term impacts. Major disruptions to education with long-term consequences. Here in Australia and all around the world, we have students that are only returning to school partly or not at all, and universities that remain closed and so on.
Well, in Italy, we almost lost a full year of school in Italy, and maybe they will go back in September, but it's going to be tough, and we still don't know. Please go on.
Yes, and we were very lucky in Australia in the sense that we were nowhere near as badly impacted. However, we seem to be having a second wave, and that we've started shutting down things again. So people are a bit nervous. So things like family violence, job losses amongst females are particularly important. Business disruption, reduced economic job and growth and job losses. Social inequalities. So this coronavirus has impacted the younger and the older members of society in particular. And of course, we see increased social unrest across the world. You know, the Black Lives Matter and other things, which are actually tied to unrest and uncertainty around COVID. However, there have been a few positives. For example, we see people working from home, and I think it's given an insight to potential future job ways of being employed with enhanced job satisfaction and perhaps even enhanced productivity for many. In most cities around the world, the lockdown has brought about a resurgence of nature, and we see that here in Australia as well. One of the other positives is improved air quality across much of the world, much of the globe. And this has important links and provides promise for future climate change policy because it shows what human activity does in terms of our air quality. So if we go to this next slide, it shows from the European Space Agency Sentinel satellite, it shows the impact of COVID shutdown in April. In terms of nitrogen dioxide. And if you look carefully, you can see Spain in the bottom left-hand side, and you can see the Alps to the north of Italy and Italy there. And you can see that air pollution averaged across all of April is about 1/3 to 1/2 of what it normally is.
Yes.
So the reduced human activity has actually improved air quality dramatically. So just to conclude, I want to show this slide relating to some current work that I'm doing in Australia with Enel Solar, which is a major Italian renewable energy company that has business all around the world. And so they are building solar plants in remote parts of Australia, including this one that you can see here. And we all know that energy from solar is a sustainable solution. It's vastly better than fossil fuels for the environment. What we've been doing is we've been working with them, with Enel, to find ways of improving sustainability, but at the same time improving energy yields and profit for the company in Australia. And we're doing this by looking at introducing vegetation beneath the panels that provide cooling, particularly when that vegetation is irrigated, because solar panels produce more energy when they're cooler. And in addition, of course, we have the opportunity to develop food production from otherwise unused land with greater food security. And of course, for the company, the co-production of energy and food and fuel and crops on the one piece of land means a more profitable business. And then there are other opportunities around harvesting water from the panels and desalination of groundwater from solar energy, providing greater water security. And of course, one of the other advantages is that we have enhanced biodiversity in this landscape. Instead of having bare ground, as we have in this slide, we can have a vegetated landscape that supports insects, butterflies, spiders, small animals, and provides an overall environmental improvement. So what I'm saying here is that there are real opportunities, and this relates to the solar industry, of a win-win situation where business can win and the environment and sustainability can win at the same time. So I only have 10 minutes, so I'll just leave it there, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Yes, but before questions come, let me ask you this personally. Oh yes, we're full of questions, but let me just ask you this: the goals you showed us were great. They looked fantastic, but then the COVID-19 seems to, like, you know, tackle them in football-like tackling. I mean, completely destroying every idea of empowering these goals and turning them into something real. Are you optimistic? Because
Well, I think that, yes. So I think that the issue is hopefully rather temporary. We all hope for economic recovery following this massive downturn. Um, but I think even the most accomplished economists do not know exactly when that recovery is going to come and how long it will take before we begin to get back to where we were. So I think that with the Sustainable Development Goals, it is similar. There are some of those goals, particularly around around health and equity, that have taken a bit of a hammering, a bit of a beating.
Yeah.
But I suspect they will return, and I hope they return as economies and sustainable development picks up. But I'm also very much an optimist. I think that there are some potential good things. I mean, there's been a lot of pain and misery, and no more so than in Italy. It's been a terrible situation. But there are some small glimmers that have come out of COVID around the possibilities and potentialities for dealing with things like climate change. As we come out of the recession associated with COVID, maybe we can develop a different economy and a different society that can begin to deal with these issues around climate change in a much better way than we have in the past. And also issues around things around workplace and work life balance. I mean, I don't know what your industry thinks, but in Australia, there's a lot of interest in what this might mean for future workplaces and for the need for large, expensive, heavily air-conditioned or heavily heated buildings where you have all your workers together. There are other opportunities for the future that might well come out of this situation.
Great. Let's hope it turns out like that and move to the first question. Consumption habits are changing in times of crisis. What step-by-step measures can the industry in all its supply chain stages take in order to return to a more sustainable normality? How can we use these changes to create a safer environment?
Well, what a question!
It's a huge one,
and
isn't
for a climate scientist, which is what I fundamentally am, I'm a climate scientist within the area of environmental science. It's probably a little bit hard for me to take any authority on answering this question. But what I would say is that the communication and print industry will probably have opportunities. I mean, one thing that we have seen, and I hope I'm not saying anything that is controversial here, one thing we have seen is that digital infrastructure around the world has stood up very well to COVID and to the huge demands that we've placed upon it. So it might well be that the digital economy and digital solutions are one part of the way ahead. And in the same way that I alluded to, maybe the way that we can adjust our consumption behaviour as we come out of COVID to address things like climate change, I would imagine that your industry, full of very innovative people, and Italians being a very innovative country, there will be all sorts of opportunities to find new ways of doing things. But I would never want to presume to be able to tell you what I particularly think in that space, because it's beyond my knowledge.
Thank you very much. We certainly hope things will turn out better than they were 2 months ago, definitely, and better than now also. And it was short, but it was your lesson was very interesting. So thank you very much, Professor Tapper.
Thank you. I was a delight. Thank you. Good luck for the rest of your conference.
Thank you. Thank you.